Okay, and hey guys, I will provide a quick caveat or condition to the rant phase and the working title of this video. If you are unable to consider an alternate model of the world because it's an insult to your intelligence as a rational, educated adult, this prejudice, this biased manner of thinking, renders you permanently blind to a very simple truth which has been prevalent throughout your life and long before then. I'm sorry to say that while this biased thinking is understandable due to our educational programming, such a prejudice neither defines you as smart nor scientific, but instead it wholly defines you as willfully ignorant and permanently blind to the plain, simple truth. The working title of this video got your attention, however, I vouch not to barrage anyone with insults for the duration, but remaining true to form, if this is your first time considering that the world is actually a stationary plane and not a spinning globe whatsoever, none of this is directed at you. The following commentary, which will be as brief as possible, is reserved for those of you out there who bash people, calling them morons and stupid because you think the world is a spinning globe, which it provably, demonstrably, scientifically is not to the degree of irrevocable certainty. To those of you, like the pastor who had my friend Annette ultimately institutionalized because she came to him with this simple truth that the Bible was right, that the world is actually not a spinning globe, you, pastor, are a dumbass and a moron. Your ego is so fragile that you are emotionally incapable of simply considering hypothetical models for argument's sake, even in this case when the world is described as a plane with the sun making circuits over and around the fixed, immovable plane Earth in the very beginning of the Judeo Christian Bible. Now, I don't typically use biblical arguments for or against the shape of the world, but in the case of a Christian pastor, I can see where this is important because most preachers teach and believe the Bible, but will never entertain the notion that the book of Genesis might actually be literally correct in its description of the world. If you or someone you know is unable to listen to reason and consider the evidence involved here, it defines such a person as the opposite of a skeptical slash scientific person, and indeed lands them in the category of a completely dedicated religious fanatic, indoctrinated by scientism as a belief system which has replaced science as a process to empirically understand reality. Theoretical astrophysics is contrary to the basic definition of science as a process because great minds are limited by no boundaries of what is possible or probable, demonstrable or falsifiable, and only the imagination of the theoretical physicist outlines the limits to possibility, not the scientific method. So, in other words, the scientific method is not even remotely applied or even related to theoretical physics. Of course, especially theoretical astrophysics. Of course, anything involving theoretical astrophysics can never be tested or verified, never falsified. So while it is indeed the opposite of science, we have somehow come to the cultural misunderstanding that theoretical physics is somehow a science based or fact based institution, which it isn't. I'm not sure exactly when the global domination of all generations of toddlers began worldwide, but as far as I know, my father and his father before him knew the Earth to be a globe, and I would assume that even my great grandfather also believed such a thing, but I'm not sure. Never met my great grandfather, but it's sort of irrelevant. Ask any propaganda expert, and they'll tell you it only takes 3 generations to completely control history and control the minds of the masses by dictating what is theoretically possible, what is socially acceptable, and what is a stupid idea for stupid, dumbass morons. We tend to form our permanent understandings most solidly between the ages of toddler to 10, and so the globe earth lie, this greatest of all deceptions, has actually been forced into our budding minds as factual for as long as most of us can remember, and ditto for even our grandparents. The important point to all this is to show you that I'm not calling everyone a stupid moron. I was right along with everyone else just 7 or 8 months ago, completely snowed, just like everyone else. But the simple truth remains any real experimentation you can possibly think to do in order to show evidence for curvature, or axial rotation, or orbital motion, or the solar frame of reference, or the galactic frame of reference, or any of that, any of these wild conflicting motions which would necessarily exist in the heliocentric model, you simply can't find any such evidence to support the theory. Physical evidence, repeatable evidence, scientific evidence. So all of the real evidence actually proves that the world is indeed stationary and is actually a stationary plane. The fact that a lot of people are pointing this out doesn't make us stupid, doesn't make us morons. It actually means we've broken the programming which was enforced on all of us since we were just toddlers, just like tens of thousands of other people have done in the last few months especially. Just like in the end of Matrix 3. If you believe the Earth is a spinning globe, then you must believe that a person standing near the equator is racing eastward at over 1,000 miles an hour, faster than the speed of sound, no less, and falling over 700,000 feet per hour, just from the spin of the Earth, even if that were stationary and just spinning, which it absolutely is not in the heliocentric model. One rotation per 24 hours at the equator, a bit less than 4,000 miles from the non-existing axis of rotation, dictates such an enormous velocity standing at the equator, and essentially no velocity in terms of spin at the poles. On top of that, the same person at the equator should experience wild changes due to inertia depending on the time of day. If you try to visualize the conventional model, the phase in our inertia compared to the Earth would constantly be changing from one extreme to the other from day to night. In the morning, say the Earth is supposedly racing up towards your feet at 66,600 miles an hour, and 12 hours later, it is supposedly racing down away from your feet at 66,600 miles per hour. Now, during the time in between such hypothetical 12-hour periods of opposing velocity of the Earth, we would experience a gradient of every velocity in between, meaning you would be racing along with the Earth under your feet, traveling from left to right at 66,600 miles per hour at the 6 o'clock a.m. mark, and the same velocity going from right to left at the 6 o'clock p.m. mark. Now, keeping in mind all this orbital motion would be affected by the rotational velocity of 1,037.5 miles per hour eastward, and along with that constant dropping away due to the spinning around a curve at over 700,000 feet per hour. But we haven't even looked at the solar frame of reference yet. It isn't even necessary to do so because we can easily disprove the heliocentric model without going into so much detail into the insane lie. Theoretical physicists love to call the spinning Earth a fixed frame of reference. To call a spinning body which is falling around a curve, around an object which is falling around a curve, around the galactic center which is allegedly traveling over 1,000,000 miles an hour, a fixed frame of reference is beyond insane. A fixed frame of reference is a train standing still, or even a train traveling at 50 miles an hour down a perfectly straight track without hitting any bumps. If that train hits a bump, a bee hovering in the train would certainly not bump up and down with the train, as the bee may only retain velocities originally lent to it by the train, but the train's frame of reference is not permanently tattooed onto the velocity of an unrelated body. In this example, a bee hovering in the train that was going perfectly straight but hit a bump. Similarly, if the train is spinning around an axis while traveling around a curved path while tumbling end over end laterally, such a body could never act as a fixed frame of reference for any object not fastly secured to the rotating and spinning and tumbling body, in this case the train, but a similar problem applies to the spinning and rotating and tumbling through space Earth as a fixed frame of reference. The idea that the spinning and rotating and flying through space Earth is somehow a fixed frame of reference is so utterly ridiculous, anyone with access to a simple merry-go-round or even a length of string and a weight to tie at the end can demonstrate that any object attached to a rotating body will never remain fixed to the rotational frame of reference without being fastly secured to the primary rotating body. If you can imagine a merry-go-round that also flies through the air at 1,000 miles an hour, to call that a fixed frame of reference is even stupider, and that isn't even a word. But for example, if you spin a weight on a string around in circles, if you let go of the string, that weight is not going to continue spinning around your fingers when you let go of the string. By the same laws of physics, if you throw a ball away from a spinning merry-go-round, it will simply not continue spinning with you around the axis. If you can possibly imagine two airplanes taking off from, say, LA to New York and the other one going from New York to LA, if it is a spinning globe, then what sort of magic must be done by these planes in order for the two flights to be even similar, let alone identical in duration? When you realize that it's physically impossible, for example, for the plane heading west in the opposite direction as the spin of the Earth, um, it's impossible for such an airplane to continue spinning around with the face of the Earth, falling backwards at about 1,000 miles per hour and dropping vertically at over 700,000 feet per hour, and take off into the air flying west at a max average of about 500 miles per hour, gaining altitude as it progresses. How can a westbound plane be traveling at 500 miles per hour west relative to the ground below and be sliding backwards at over 1,000 miles per hour at the same time while falling over 700,000 feet per hour at the same time? The simple fact that one must consider is that the two flights from LA to New York and back are often identical in terms of duration at least some of the time, which proves conclusively that the Earth itself is completely, utterly, perfectly stationary. Furthermore, you'll often see that the eastbound flights are a bit shorter than the westbound flights, which is the exact opposite of what you'd expect if all the destinations were constantly spinning east, independent of the planes, which it would be, but it isn't because it's not spinning. Your programming into globism will force you into laboring towards making the numbers work in theory on a spinning globe, and it's apparently very easy for people to erroneously follow the herd on this stance. People will try to tell you that since both of the planes are spinning with the face of the Earth prior to takeoff, therefore the planes will continue spinning with the face of the Earth for the duration of the flight, regardless of acceleration, direction of travel, east to west, north to south, doesn't matter. Somehow the plane magically knows exactly what the ground beneath is doing. Regardless of atmospheric conditions, regardless of altitude, that plane is always going to stay fixed to the frame of reference directly with the ground below, even though the plane is traveling upon its own trajectory with its own propulsion, independent of the face of the Earth, not connected in any sort of way. The plane just knows without making any sort of calculations. Pilots land planes all the time on north to south runways, east to west runways, and you can clearly see that the runway is stationary and the plane is the only thing moving relative to the ground. Regardless of direction of travel, there is no spinning. Now, the stance that regardless of acceleration of the plane, direction of travel, atmospheric conditions, altitude, etc., it's always going to remain fixed to the ground, to the frame of reference with the ground, is the most ridiculous dismissal of logic and physical laws, since we know for sure that objects such as planes will never remain fixed to a rotating frame of reference such as a hypothetical spinning globe Earth, unless the object is tightly fastened to the rotating body. The instant each plane takes off, it would immediately break the rotating frame of reference and would travel as an independent body. Thus, it is impossible for the two flights mentioned to have even a remotely similar duration, let alone identical duration, if the world itself is actually spinning 1,037.5 miles per hour eastward at the equator. The other go-to argument for globists involves stating that the atmosphere is also rotating with the face of the Earth, and so the two planes are magically fastened to the rotating frame of reference by the atmosphere. This argument is necessary to really consider and test if you are